week 12 of the fantasy football season. And here's a few kickers I have as sleepers this week. The first guy, Cameron Dicker of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Hopkins finally going on injured reserve, and he signed from the practice squad officially now, is Cameron Dicker. So the last few games filling in here, he's been playing good football for Hopkins. Week 9 at Atlanta, 8 fantasy points. Week 10 at the 49ers, 12. And week 11 versus the Chiefs, 10. So right now, a good matchup in week 12. Indoors once again at the Arizona Cardinals. That can't stop anyone. They give up the 10th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. Dicker surprisingly still out there in tons of fantasy leagues, even though he is playing with a high-powered offense and still putting up points weekly since he got signed out there in 78% of fantasy leagues. And he's definitely a sleeper this week. The next kicker, Matthew Wright of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Matthew Wright, we saw him bounce around a little bit early in the season, but now it looks like he might have found a home in Pittsburgh with Chris Boswell on injured reserve. In the last couple games here for him since they signed him up, week 10 versus New Orleans, 8 fantasy points, and week 11 versus Cincinnati, 13. So obviously those were good matchups on paper, but with New Orleans giving up the second most fantasy points to kickers on the season, and Cincinnati giving up the most. So this week here, a little bit different, but it's nice to see it's an indoor game on Monday Night Football in Indianapolis, and they still give up the 19th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And right here, this is the type of offense over there in Pittsburgh where they do got to settle, obviously, for a lot of field goals, because Kenny Pickett in this offense is young. Their offensive line ain't that great, and they take a decent amount of sacks and loss of yardage. So right here, Wright, I think, could be a decent sleeper option once again here in week 12, and he's available in 93% of fantasy leagues. And the third and final kicker I have is a sleeper, is Joey Sly of the Washington Commanders. So last week he was on this list, and once again he made it. He's available in 91% of fantasy leagues. And Joey Sly, the last 3 weeks here, starting to get it going. Week 9 versus the Vikings, 6. Week 10 at Philly, 19. And week 11 at Houston, 12. So this week here, good matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons that give up the 13th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And Joey Sly going back to his Carolina Panther days. We know he's a kicker who has a big boot. We know he's a big personality as well for a kicker, but he's definitely been getting the job done over the last few weeks here. And this Washington Commander team, believe it or not, have won 4 out of 5 ball games. So right here, Joey Sly is playing a good part for this team. He's hitting some timely field goals, and this week here, he's a sleeper option. So that's a few kickers I have as sleepers for week 12 of the fantasy football season.